South Korea is home to some of the world's biggest brands: Samsung, Hyundai, LG. But behind these names are family dynasties so powerful, so entrenched, that many believe they not elected officials truly run the country. And when profit and influence collide with safety and law, the results can be catastrophic. Tonight we dive into the story of how unchecked corporate power led to one of the darkest tragedies in South Korea's history, the sinking of the Sewol ferry, and how it exposed the disturbing grip that these family-run conglomerates known as chaebols have over an entire nation. Chapter 1. The Call for Help. On a spring morning in 2014, an emergency dispatcher in South Korea received a chilling call. The voice on the line was not from a captain, not from a crew member, but from a boy. It was a student aboard a ferry making a routine journey to Jeju Island, a popular vacation destination. The dispatcher was confused. If the ferry was in danger, why was a child calling? Where was the captain? Where were the adults? On board, the 6,800-ton ferry began to tilt. At first, some kids laughed at it. Felt like an amusement park ride. But excitement turned into panic when water rushed in. The ferry was sinking. By the end of that day, more than 300 people were dead, most of them children. The boy who made that desperate call never made it home. The Sewol ferry disaster left South Korea traumatized, horrified, and furious. Chapter 2. Betrayal at Sea. In the hours after the sinking, the nation demanded answers. Why weren't the children rescued? It turned out the passengers were told to stay in their cabins. That order came from the captain himself, even as the ship was tilting into the sea. While the students obeyed, the captain and several crew members abandoned ship. South Korea's president at the time declared their actions akin to murder. The captain was sentenced to life in prison. The Coast Guard came under fire too. Their rescue was slow, unorganized, and tragically ineffective. But as investigators dug deeper, it became clear incompetence was only half the story. Chapter 3. Profits over lives. The Sewol should never have been sailing that day. The ferry was illegally modified, stacked with far more cargo than it was designed to carry. Twice as heavy as regulations allowed. Why? Because more cargo meant more money. Profit had been prioritized over safety. But who owned the ferry? Who allowed this to happen? That is where the story moves beyond one ship and into the murky world of South Korea's corporate dynasties, the chaebols. Chapter 4. The rise of the chaebols. To understand their power, we need to rewind. After the Korean War in the 1950s, South Korea was one of the poorest countries on earth. Military dictators at the time made a bet. They poured resources into select families, hoping to rebuild the economy through industry. It worked in paper. These families, backed by the government, built vast empires in electronics, manufacturing, and finance. Samsung, LG, Hyundai, SK Group, household names worldwide, each controlled by a single-family dynasty. By the 1980s, these conglomerates' chaebols were celebrated as the engines of South Korea's miracle on the Han River. But concentrated wealth came with concentrated power. Today, Samsung alone accounts for a staggering portion of South Korea's GDP. In 2024, now Samsung was responsible for nearly half of the country's economic growth. With numbers like that, it's no wonder politicians have long treated chaebols as untouchable. Chapter 5. When the elite lose their masks. The chaebol story isn't just about money, it's about arrogance. And sometimes that arrogance explodes into public view. Take 2014, just months after the Sewol sinking. Heather Cho, a vice president at Korean Air and daughter of the company's chairman, caused global outrage in what became known as the nut rage incident. On a flight leaving New York, a flight attendant served her macadamia nuts in a bag, not on a plate. Cho lost control. She screamed at the crew, forced the chief attendant to kneel and apologize, and even ordered the plane back to the gate just to throw him off. The world laughed, but in South Korea people were enraged. It was yet another reminder of the entitlement of chaebol heirs, who seemed to live by a different set of rules. Even when convicted, chaebol leaders often received light sentences, early pardons, or no punishment at all. Because punishing them, many argued, would hurt the economy. Chapter 6. The President and the Ferry. When the Sewol tragedy struck. South Korea's president was Park Geun-hye, daughter of former dictator Park Geun-hye, very man who helped create the chaebol system decades earlier. She promised accountability. Investigators eventually revealed that the Sewol was owned by a shadowy businessman named Yoo Byung-eun. Yoo was no ordinary tycoon. He was a reclusive figure, a cult-like religious leader, and an art enthusiast, who even built a marble gallery on board the ferry to display his photography. His empire was vast, supported by members of his church who donated money that was funneled into businesses. For decades, Yoo had avoided consequences for shady financial dealings, fraud, and even a shocking mass death of church followers in the 1980s. Now, investigators tied him directly to the Sewol. A massive manhunt began. Nearly 10,000 officers scoured the country. Weeks later, his decomposed body was found in an orchard, surrounded by wine bottles and one of his own books. To this day, his exact cause of death remains a mystery. Chapter 7. Protests in the streets. The Sewol wasn't just a ferry disaster. It was a breaking point. Parents of the dead children demanded answers. Weekly candlelight vigils grew into massive protests, where thousands called for the president's resignation. Instead of compassion, the government cracked down. Police used water cannons and pepper spray on grieving families and supporters. Authorities spied on protesters trying to suppress dissent. But anger only grew. By 2016, a new scandal erupted. This time, it wasn't about a ferry. It was about bribery at the very top. Chapter 8. The fall of a president. President Park herself was exposed. She had accepted millions in bribes from chaebol leaders, including Samsung's heir, Lee Jae-yong. In exchange, she granted favors, like approving a controversial merger that gave the Samsung family even greater control over their empire. The scandal toppled her presidency. She became the first South Korean president ever impeached, sentenced to 24 years in prison. Lee Jae-yong, the crown prince of Samsung, was also convicted of bribery. But like so many chaebol heirs before him, his punishment didn't last. Within a year, he was pardoned. The justification: the economy needed him. Right. It was history repeating itself. Business as usual today. Lee Jae-yong sits at the top of Samsung Electronics, one of the most powerful tech companies on earth. He's South Korea's richest man. And in 2022, even former President Park was unexpectedly pardoned for the sake of unity. For ordinary South Koreans, the message is clear. When you belong to the elite families, the rules don't apply. Chapter 10. The unanswered question. The Sewol tragedy remains one of the darkest moments in South Korea's modern history. It was just about a sinking ship. It was about a system that let greed and negligence outweigh human lives. And while protests, scandals, and even impeachments have shaken the country, the chaebol system remains largely intact. Ordinary people may resent their power, yet hundreds of thousands still apply for jobs at Samsung and Hyundai each year, chasing the stability and high wages only these giants can provide. So the question lingers. Can real reform ever happen in a country where a few families control so much wealth, so much influence, and ultimately so much of the nation's fate? What do you think? Are South Korea's chaebols an unstoppable force, or will growing public frustration one day break their grip? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you want to dive deeper into stories of power, corruption, and history's hidden truths, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell.